I can't believe I'm doing a list video. What's up, my babies? Lone Wolf here, and today I wanted to talk about the lessons I learned as a student recreational pilot that have come in very handy for me as a motorcycle rider. So in another life, I was getting my pilot's license. Unfortunately, I had an eye injury, so I had to put that on hold for an indefinite amount of time. I needed something else to keep my adrenaline going, so thus the motorcycle. But there's quite a bit I learned through my flight training that has proven very valuable as I learned how to ride a motorcycle. So the first lesson, and you've probably heard this one before, is never assume other people can see you. You should always consider yourself invisible. Just because you're doing everything you can to make yourself as visible as possible doesn't mean people actually see you. They will look right through you. When you're flying a plane, though, you have the opportunity to get on the radio and try to talk to that other traffic. Make sure that they can see you. You can communicate with them, you can figure out where they're going. But on a motorcycle, it's just you. You can't really communicate with those other drivers. So it's really important to always assume that nobody on the road sees you. And that'll keep you out of a lot of tight jams. The second lesson is always do your pre-flight. So when you're flying a plane, there's a big checklist of items you go through to make sure all of your cables are secured, your tanks are full, there aren't any rats that have made a nest in the engine compartment. These are all important things to take a look at before you get in a plane. On a motorcycle, most people just go run out and jump on their motorcycle. But you should actually do a quick walk around, make sure everything looks okay. You know, the most important thing on a plane is fuel, because fuel exhaustion contributes to most of the recreational pilot accidents. On a motorcycle, your tires are the most important thing. You got to make sure they're properly inflated, because if they're not, you run the high risk of putting it down around a corner. So when you ride, take a quick walk around your bike, make sure there are no leaks, make sure there are no cables hanging out where there didn't used to be, and that'll help keep you safe on the road. You okay? You got? You need some air?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's no good.
Yeah. We'll get some more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything I can do?
I'm okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, no problem.
See you guys.
Bummer. And I just bought this tire inflating kit. I'm almost like wanting to go back and get it. Anyway, that's another point. As a motorcyclist, be a good steward of the road. It just makes us all look good. Number 3, good equipment. So when you ride, there are 2 pieces of equipment that should be in top running shape. First of all is your bike. Your bike should always be in good running shape. That's kind of a given, right? But the other piece of equipment is your safety gear. You need to make sure that you invest in good gloves, good jacket, pants, boots. And I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here because I ride in jeans, but really that's because I just haven't gotten around to finding a really good pair of hot weather pants. But in the very near future, I'm going to be starting to wear motorcycle pants whenever I ride. Fourth is weather. Now, obviously for airplanes, weather's very important because it pretty much drives everything an airplane does, right? In fact, if you go into the waiting room with a bunch of pilots, half the time they're talking about the weather. They're talking about this front that's coming in, or this thunderstorm, or what it does normally this time of year. Pilots are basically very, very advanced amateur meteorologists. Now, when you're on a motorcycle, you're actually a lot more exposed to the weather than even a pilot is. Think about all the ways the weather affects you, including the performance of your motorcycle and your personal comfort. You also want to know what the weather's like the whole ride. Here in California, I can start out here in Sacramento where it's 105 and get out to the coast and it's 65. So whenever I go out for a ride like that, I got to bring a little bit of warm weather gear. Otherwise, these digits right here are going to be stone cold. So it's really important to keep track of the weather. I can't say that enough. Number 5, know your own limitations. So I had one day, I think it was like my 3rd solo flight, and I was really excited to get out there. And I get in the plane, I do a weather check, and it was gusting 10 to 15 miles an hour, not a big deal. I pull the plane around to parking, I do my run up, and I feel the plane moving a little bit, and I'm like, no, this feels gustier than 10 to 15. So I check the weather again. Well, now it went up to 15 to 20. And I thought, oh, it's kind of pushing it. So I decided to give it like 10 minutes, and I sat there for 10 minutes, engine running, just kind of waiting to see what happened. I checked the weather one last time, and it was gusting between 18 and 22. And I knew that was outside of my limits. And even though I wanted nothing more than to get up in the air that day, I knew I couldn't. I knew it wasn't safe. I wasn't prepared for that on my third solo flight. So I pulled back around into parking. I went in, gave the keys to the guy, and went home. Same thing with motorcycles, and especially if you're in a group ride, you have to know your limits. You have to know what you are able to safely do, and don't let other people, if you're following people, don't let that dictate how aggressively you ride. If you need to fall back, do it. If you need to go all the way to the back and say, hey guys, just take off, I'm going to take it easy, do it. Just don't ride outside of your limits. You have to know what your limits are. You're the only one who knows what your limits are. Nobody's going to be sitting over your shoulder telling you that something's too aggressive. That's something you have to determine for yourself. All right, number 6 is maintenance. And that's a little bit of a no-brainer. You need to maintain your bike just like you would maintain an airplane. Make sure you get the oil change, make sure you've got good tires on the bike, make sure your battery's in good shape. You definitely don't want to be in an accident or be stranded someplace because you got an old battery that's really not holding a charge. With motorcycles, for some reason, a lot of people overlook maintenance. I know when I bought this, the oil in this thing was like sludge. It was awful. People will just ignore maintenance on a motorcycle for some reason, but it's really important, and it'll make sure your bike lasts a long time and make sure that it also operates as safely as possible. So number 7, always have an exit strategy. So when you're in a plane, you're constantly looking out for places you could land in case of an emergency. You know where the airports are. You know, okay, there's a field down there. If I had to put down, I could put down in that field. There's a highway right there. There's an airport 2 miles behind me. You always know where these places are that you can land, because it's critical that you have an exit strategy so that you don't have to think if suddenly you find yourself needing one. Same thing with a motorcycle. You should always be aware of where you can go if things go wrong. And that might be up on a sidewalk, that might be off in a ditch. You know, in this case, I'm looking at both sides. There's a pretty big ditch over there. There's some grass over here. I'm probably going to go off over here if there's an emergency or something like that. But you should always have an out. You should always have a way to get out of a sticky situation. And if you don't have an out, try to get yourself in a position where you do, because if you can't get out of a sticky situation, you're really asking for trouble. So number 8 is to visualize scenarios. So one thing pilots and even cops do all the time is they visualize and practice different scenarios. What happens if an engine fails? What do I do? You know, what happens if the wings start icing up? What's my next step if I all of a sudden start losing control of the airplane or the plane goes into a stall? And they will constantly go through these, because the more you rehearse these scenarios in your mind, the more it's second nature if it actually happens. So when you're out on your bike, it's good to occasionally go through some different scenarios. What happens if a car pulls in front of me? Where would I go? What happens if somebody jams on their brakes? What's the safest place for me to go to avoid getting in an accident or heading into oncoming traffic? If you constantly work through these scenarios, when they happen, you won't even have to think about them. You'll just do them. You'll just execute them, and hopefully you'll be safe. All right, number 9, avoid get-there-itis. So that's a little phrase they use in aviation that refers to when somebody's so eager to get someplace that they're starting to make bad decisions. There are a lot of occasions where a pilot is flying in, the airport's 30 minutes away, they look down, they've got 40 minutes of fuel, and they think, okay, I really don't want to have to stop, fill up, that's going to take an extra hour out of my time. I think I can make it. I got 40 minutes of fuel, it's 30 minutes away. And they make a decision based on trying to get home as quickly as possible. But a lot of times they fail to consider things like headwinds or the amount of time they're going to spend up in the air getting into a landing pattern. And then they end up just crashing on the freeway. So the same thing with motorcycles. Avoid get-there-itis. You might be 20 minutes from home, but if your hands are frozen and your legs are shaking, you're putting yourself at risk. It's a lot better to pull off, go into a McDonald's, spend 20 minutes and warm up, than to really push through that last 20 minutes when the only thing you're going to be able to focus on is how freaking cold your hands are. Number 10, check your attitude. So for pilots, one of the worst things you can do is take an airplane up when you're distracted. If you just had a fight with your wife, or you're find out your mom is sick and in the hospital, the last thing you should do is go get in an airplane. Same thing with a motorcycle. You should not be riding a motorcycle if you're distracted, pissed off, upset, depressed, anything other than excited to be out on the road. So if you find yourself getting on your bike and you're clenching your teeth and you're pissed off because your wife just did something that irritated the hell out of you, take a second, take a breath, calm down, and think about the fact that you're about to go get on a motorcycle, which is awesome. This is like the best thing in the world. And put yourself in a happy mood before you take off. And finally, that brings us to number 11, one of the most important lessons. So I remember my flight instructor sat down with me and he said, you know, when you get your pilot's license, he goes, that doesn't mean you're good at flying. That just means that the FAA has said that you have the minimum skills required to pilot an aircraft without the direct or indirect supervision of a certified instructor. That is it. He said your pilot's license isn't a measure of competency. It's a license to start learning. And the exact same rule applies to motorcycles. So for me to go get my motorcycle license, literally all I had to do was go take a 2-day course in a closed parking lot at speeds of less than 30 miles an hour. Then I had to go down to the DMV, fill out a form, and next thing I know, I got a piece of paper with my M1 endorsement. That is it. Now, if you walked up to anybody, nobody in their right mind would be looking over your experience at riding motorcycles and go, well, you've only been riding for a week, but oh, look, you've got your A1 endorsement. Oh, here are the keys to my Busa. Have a good time, kid. Nobody would. So when you get your motorcycle license, when you get your endorsement, you should consider that a license to start learning. You have met the minimum requirements to operate a motorcycle without some kind of instructor being present. And that is it. That's all that means. And for the rest of your riding life, you should always see that license as a license to learn, because you should constantly be learning about motorcycles, learning more and more about yourself, learning about how they ride. You're going to have different types of motorcycles. It's going to be a complete learning experience for the rest of your life. And you should never think that you have learned everything there is, because that's just not going to happen. Oh. Thank you, sir. Pretty quiet down there today. I promise you we will see at least one person run a red light and one person crossing the street on foot against the light. I promise you, it's guaranteed. Look at all these people running this red light. There you go, all in one intersection. You got that dude who ran the red light, that asshole who crossed the street on bike against the red. I'm telling you. Crazy old people crossing the fucking street. This guy's, oh my god, look at this shit. Look at this shit we gotta put up with. God damn. Fucking Sacramento. Alright, my babies, that's all I got for you today. Hope you're having a good week. Looking forward to SCMM in just a couple weeks here. I'm gonna have a couple more videos on what I'm doing to get ready for that long ride I got ahead of me. Longest ride I've done so far. So I'll have a little bit more for you to watch before we head down there, and of course there will be massive coverage of SCMM. I'm sure there are going to be more than 250 people there, so they'll have a lot of opportunity to see a lot of motovloggers talking a lot about how great it is to be with other motovloggers. Alright, so I delayed my stop just so you could go. You go. Yep. Oh, god damn it. Crap, I forgot to say it. But now there's somebody watching me, so we'll do it on the down low. Peace.